Hey everyone, Tinman here, and we have a new contender for the crown of Whitespire. Enno, the Scavenger King, joins Dota Underlords and rounds out the initial roster of 4 Underlords. This menacing little furball is sure to wreak havoc on your opponent's game plans, positioning, and even their items. This guide will cover the general strategy, build choices, when to pick them, and positioning for Enno. Let's start with the basic strategy. Enno's passive is Escape Artist, where he will jump out of battle up to 3 times. The first time he drops below 75%, 50%, and 25% health, stunning adjacent enemies as he makes his escape. He'll then reappear next to a random opponent and again stun all adjacent units upon landing. This ability gives him a lot of survivability despite being a relatively squishy ranged unit. Regardless of build, he's going to be spamming an ability which will apply poison to enemy units. Poison is a new status debuff similar to On Fire, where the target will take 15 physical damage per second for 5 seconds per stack of poison and also reduce the healing that that unit receives. This gives him a lot of anti-healing utility regardless of build choice. And finally, Enno is a highly disruptive unit for the opponent's game plan. This makes him quite useful into almost every build, but certain alliances like Brutes, Warriors, and Heartless really take full advantage of his abilities. Venomancer and Orb of Venom have also been modified to also apply poison, which pairs well with the stacks from Enno. He's at his best against opposing healing effects from Warlocks and Healers, but also quite strong against opposing ranged carries like Sniper, who are hard to reach in the back corner of the board. Enno's first build is the Healin' and Stealin' build. His first ability is Dr. Enno's Soothing Balm, where every 3 seconds, Enno will spray nearby enemies with a poison dart, which also heals up adjacent allies. This poison, as we talked about before, will deal the damage over time and also reduce the opposing healing. This ability works very well with melee-heavy builds of your own, since your melee units are most likely to take advantage of the healing being adjacent to enemies. Enno's second ability here is Yoink, and unlike other Underlords' ultimate abilities, this ability is not cast, it's a passive effect, where Enno will steal the lowest tier item from an enemy unit at the start of combat. They'll lose that item effect and Enno will gain it. When the enemy dies in range of Enno, he will then swap his current item for theirs if the new item is a higher tier than his current item. This can lead to a lot of really weird situations and interactions. Enno might steal, say, a chainmail and become very tanky, or perhaps a Gloves of Haste to increase his attack speed. But then later on in the fight, he might grab something like an Octarine Essence and start spamming his Soothing Balm even faster, or he might even silence himself with a Mask of Madness, which would be a little bit disastrous for you. In the very late game, he might even steal very powerful effects like Mechanism, Vladimir's Offering, or even summon a Thunder Hide with an opponent's Horn of the Alpha if you can get that late into the game with him. This adds such a really interesting wrinkle to the game. For the Enno players, this can be very powerful if you grab high quality items, but if the opponent realizes that there's a stealing Enno in the game, they might opt to take items that are a little bit less impactful if stolen, like mana items or utilities or contraption items. The power level of this version of Enno depends on your opponents to some extent. So on average, I think he'll be a little useful, but he can vary wildly based on the game state. This Enno will routinely apply poison, actually both of them will, regardless of the build, and the poison debuff will reduce the healing, so that makes him a great answer to opposing healing. So that's when you want to pick him if your opponent has lots of healers, warlocks, or perhaps healing support in Essex, if there's a few of those in the game. If you see several opponents going for these, you should definitely pick either version of Enno that you're offered. The Healing and Stealin' build is best when you have a lot of your own melee units to take full advantage of that healing effect, such as Knights, Warriors, Brutes, etc. This version is a little bit less useful with more range damage compositions like Mages or perhaps certain builds of Hunters, where they're not going to be in range to get that bonus healing. His Yoink ability is generally useful against all opponents and in every build, so there's not like a specific build that takes more advantage of that than others, I don't believe. In general, though, this version of Enno seems a little bit weak. The stealing items is a cool effect, but it's a bit less impactful than I would like. It's just been a day since he's been released, so if my initial impressions are true, that he is a little bit underpowered, he'll probably get buffed up at some point, which would definitely make him a lot more appealing. Enno's second build is more damage-focused build and is wonderfully named the Rabid Furball build. His first ability is Death Spin, which once again casts every 3 seconds and applies the poison dart to nearby enemies, but also deals a little bit of bonus damage on the side. This ability rather is quite strong against lightly armored opponents, especially if you have the Heartless Alliance, as this ability does entirely physical damage. Enno's ultimate in this version is All Out Attack, which will cast 12 seconds into the fight. Enno will round up all of the opposing units, apply 5 stacks of poison to them, and then randomly displace them to a new spot on the board. This will massively disrupt the opponent's positioning. If they had, say, a sniper in the back line that you couldn't get to before because you had an all melee lineup, he might end up right in the middle of your team ready to get taken out. Their tanks might get thrown far away from the fight. If they were playing knights, they will almost certainly be separated and they'll lose their bonus damage reduction. All Out Attack does take a few seconds to resolve, meaning that your team can take a few seconds to kind of chill, get their cooldowns back up, possibly even heal a bit if you have a unit like Necrophos or Warlock. The damage done by the ability is quite strong as well, since it does hit every single opposing unit. Overall, this ability should be useful against most opponents. It's at its best against opponents who are trying to protect carries like Sniper or Venomancer in the backline, and it's at its worst against opposing assassins who really have a lot of mobility, and the random positioning, they're just going to jump around anyway right after the all-out attack. So once again, you want to be picking this version of Enno if the opponent has lots of healing. You want to pick either version of Enno. And it's definitely very useful against less armored opponents, mages, or if you have Heartless Lions, because it's all physical damage. And so the Armor Shred will really help out to increase his damage output. And of course, the all-out attack is great against opposing ranged carries like Sniper, as discussed. And although the all-out attack, even though it's like at its best against these kind of backline carries like Sniper or Venomancer or whoever, it's actually really good in almost every situation. It deals a ton of damage and really messes up any opposing formation or game plans. If they wanted to focus fire certain units, they wanted to have other units tank, they just get thrown all over the place and it really messes them up. It feels like it's a very strong ability in almost every build, I would say except mages, because mages really want opponents to be nice and stacked up in an ordered formation to line up all of their AoEs and spells. So in pretty much every other build, I feel like this version, the Rabid Furball version of Enno, is quite strong. There are two main options for positioning Enno regardless of your build. The first option is to place him directly in the front line, in a prime position to get hit by a lot of opponents' attacks. Now this is kind of weird for a ranged unit to be kind of alone up front here in this position, but this will ensure that he drops to 75% health very quickly, which will trigger his Escape Artist ability, stunning nearby enemies, and then moving to a new spot. This option is best if you have relatively few frontliners and you need a bit more stun and CC while your backliners deal the bulk of your damage output, as in this Hunter example. The second option, if you have a more robust frontline with, say, Brutes or Warriors or something like that, is to just place him just behind, one row behind, in the second row. This will maximize the number of enemies hit by his Poison Dart ability and will hopefully keep him in a safe spot to avoid jumping around right away. This position is often better if you really want the healing reduction from the poison on their frontliners in particular. If, say, your opponent has something like Treant Protector or other healing effects, you can really help to punch through their frontline quicker if you have Enno in this spot. One last special case is against opposing assassins, and if you know that you'll be up against other assassins, it might be wise to place him sort of alone on the backline to bait as many opposing assassins to him as possible. This will once again quickly trigger his Escape Artist ability, stunning all of the opponents and then letting him sneak away to a new, hopefully safer location. So that is it for this Enno guide. Enno is a pretty strong option in a lot of compositions. I think currently the Rabid Furball build is definitely the preferred one over the Healin' and Stealin', but I'm sure some balance changes may come in and even that out. I think both of them are a really cool design, although right now Rabid Furball seems to be slightly preferred. Once again though, Underlord choice is always contextual based on your build, your opponent's builds, and which particular talent choice you're offered. Don't forget about the Nesix, Jarl, and Hobgen. They are still great options as well in lots of different builds. Special thanks to all of my channel members and other supporters, and especially to my Lord tier channel members John Vise and Segi Fault. If you like this kind of content and want to help me continue doing it, please do consider supporting me by clicking the join button down below. You get early access to guide videos like this, as well as awesome other perks during my live streams and chats like that. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.